On a Tuesday morning in September 2019, Dr. Mara Voss sat alone in a federal evidence room in Quantico, Virginia, reading a ransom note she had written herself, except she hadn't written it, had never seen it before in her life, and the child it referenced had been missing for 11 days. By the end of this story, you will understand why investigators stopped looking for a copycat, stopped looking for a colleague, stopped looking for anyone who knew Mara Voss, and started looking at something that has no clean explanation, no satisfying resolution, and no precedent in the entire history of forensic linguistics. You will also learn what was written on the back of that note. The thing they didn't tell the press. The thing that made a 20-year veteran of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit walk out of the building and not come back for 6 months. But before we get there, we need to understand who Mara Voss was, because that matters enormously. That matters in a way that will make your skin tighten before we're done. Mara had spent 19 years building one of the most respected careers in forensic linguistics in the country. If you're unfamiliar with the field, here's the simplest way to put it. The way you write is as unique as the way you walk. Everyone has verbal fingerprints. The words you choose, the rhythm of your sentences, the way you abbreviate, the punctuation you lean on when you're tired or in a hurry, the syntactic structures you default to under stress. All of it is measurable, all of it is catalogable, and all of it is, with enough data and enough expertise, identifiable. Mara was among the best in the world at reading those fingerprints. She worked out of a rented office on the 3rd floor of a gray building in Bethesda, Maryland, that smelled permanently of old coffee and the particular kind of carpet that had absorbed too many years of too many people's anxiety. Her desk was buried. Papers, printed emails, transcripts, post-it notes in colors that corresponded to a filing system only she fully understood. Colleagues who visited her described the same sensation every time, that the room was thinking, that you had walked into a mind that had been externalized and spread across every flat surface. Her assistant, a 26-year-old named Devlin Marsh, once said that being in Mara's office felt like standing inside someone's skull. Mara herself was 43 at the time this story begins. She was slight, with dark circles under pale eyes that her students had described as unsettling. Not unkind, not cold, just relentlessly focused in a way that made you feel she was reading something written on the back of your face. She wore her dark hair pulled back tight when she was working, loose when she wasn't, and according to everyone who knew her, she was almost always working. She had no partner. She had a cat named Subject, which tells you most of what you need to know about her sense of humor and the shape of her personal life. In the spring of 2019, she was contacted by Special Agent Renata Osei of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division. 17 kidnapping cases for states Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Victims ranging in age from 6 to 51. Ransom notes had been recovered in 15 of the 17 cases. The notes were the problem. The notes were the reason Mara had been called in rather than any of the Bureau's internal linguists, because the Bureau's internal linguists had looked at the notes, and then they had looked at each other, and then someone had picked up a phone and called Mara. They hadn't told her why. They just said they needed her, specifically, and that the case was unlike anything they'd encountered. Mara had heard that before. She drove down to Quantico on a Wednesday in late August and sat across from Agent Osei in a room with gray walls and a table that was bolted to the floor, and Osei had placed a single folder in front of her. Not the full case files. Just one note. A starting point. A way to ease her in. And here is where you need to understand something important. What happened in the next 4 minutes, before she had even opened the second page, would change the entire trajectory of the investigation, and it would do something else too. It would make Mara question a memory she had carried for over 30 years. A memory of a night she had always believed she'd spent alone. She opened the folder. She read the first paragraph. And without looking up, in a voice so quiet that Osei had to lean forward to hear it, Mara said 3 words. "This is mine." Osei did lean forward. She had been watching Mara's face with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting a long time for a specific reaction and is now watching it happen exactly as feared. "This is mine," Mara said again. Not louder, just more certain. She wasn't claiming authorship. She wasn't confessing. She was doing what she did, reading, identifying, recognizing, and what she was recognizing was herself. The cadence of the opening sentence. The way the clause folded back on itself in the second line. A syntactic tic she had spent years mapping in other people's writing without ever fully acknowledging she did it herself. The abbreviation in the third paragraph, a shorthand she had developed in graduate school for her own notes, something she had never seen replicated in anyone else's work in 19 years of practice. It wasn't a common abbreviation. It wasn't intuitive. It was hers the way a scar is yours, not chosen, just accumulated. She set the page down very carefully on the table in front of her, as though it were made of something that could break or burn. "Where did this come from?" she asked. Osei told her. "Chattanooga, Tennessee." Left on the doorstep of a family whose 7-year-old daughter had been taken from her bedroom 3 days prior. The girl was recovered 6 days later, unharmed, left outside a fire station in Nashville with no memory of the time she had been gone. The note had asked for no money. It had asked for nothing at all. That was its own horror. A ransom note with no ransom. A demand that contained no demand, just language, precise and intimate and utterly, impossibly Mara's. The next 4 hours were among the most disorienting of Mara's professional life. Osei brought in the other notes. Not all 15 at once, but gradually, one by one, in what Mara would later describe as feeling like a slow drowning. Each note was its own variation, its own context, its own victim. A 51-year-old accountant in Lexington, Kentucky. Twin boys, age 9, in Ellijay, Georgia. A teenage girl in Harlan County. Different ages, different circumstances, different cities, different years, the cases stretched back almost a decade, and yet the language held. Every note bore her fingerprints. Not similar fingerprints. Not the fingerprints of someone who had studied her. Hers. Precisely. Completely. Down to the level of detail that only another forensic linguist would think to look for. She began to feel it physically before she understood it intellectually. A pressure behind her sternum. A faint high ringing in her ears that she recognized as the sound her own body made when it was frightened and trying not to show it. The evidence room was cold in the particular way of rooms that are always cold, not seasonal, not weather-related, but deliberately institutionally cold, the kind of cold that keeps evidence from degrading, that preserves things as they were. She would think about that later. About preservation. About things being kept exactly as they were for exactly the right moment. The fluorescent light above her flickered once, twice, then held. No one else in the room seemed to notice. By the time the 12th note was placed in front of her, Mara had stopped saying anything out loud. She had retreated somewhere interior, some analytical space where she went when the problem was large enough to require it, and she was building a structure in her head, a profile not of the kidnapper but of the language itself. Trying to find the seam. Trying to find the place where the imitation began and her own patterns ended. Looking for the edge of herself in someone else's work. There was no edge. That was the thing. In 11 of the 15 notes, she could not find the boundary. Not because the imitation was perfect, but because there was no imitation. She knew imitation. She had spent her entire career detecting it. This was not a person writing like Mara Voss. This was Mara Voss written by something that was not her. She told Osei this. Quietly, precisely, using the language of her discipline because it was the only language she trusted not to collapse under the weight of what she was saying. Osei nodded in the way of someone who has already arrived at the destination and has been waiting for the other person to make the journey. "There are 3 more things," Osei said. "I need you to know them in order." Mara placed her hands flat on the table. "Steady them. Ground them. Go ahead." The first is the postmarks. 14 of the 15 notes were postmarked within 48 hours of each victim's disappearance. They were mailed from post offices in the towns where the victims were taken. She paused. The 15th was postmarked differently. Mara said nothing. It was postmarked 37 years ago. March 4, 1982. The fluorescent light flickered again. Mara was born on March 4, 1982. She heard Osei continue speaking. She tracked the words. She had always been good at tracking words even when the ground was moving under her. And the ground was very clearly moving under her now. The envelope had been analyzed. The paper had been analyzed. The ink, the stamp, the postmark itself. All of it was consistent with 1982. The note inside, however, referenced details of a kidnapping that had occurred in West Virginia in 2017. A 10-year-old boy named Callum Prest. A case that hadn't existed in 1982. A case that couldn't have been written about in 1982 by anyone who was not, in some definitionally impossible way, writing from somewhere outside of 1982. The note was written in Mara's syntax, Mara's abbreviations, Mara's particular folding cadence. The handwriting wasn't typed. All the notes were handwritten, and the handwriting matched nothing in any database. But here is the thing that Mara understood before Osei reached the third item, before she was told the second thing, before any of it arrived at its conclusion. The thing that made her press her hands harder against the cold table until the metal ached in her palms. The handwriting wasn't unrecognizable to her. It was her handwriting, or something that her handwriting would become. Something slightly more pressured, slightly more compressed, the kind of change that comes to a person's hand over time when they have been under sustained and unrelenting stress. Her handwriting as it might look in 10 years, in 15, if something in her life bore down on her long and hard enough to change the way her pen moved through the world. She hadn't said this yet to Osei. She hadn't said it to anyone. The second thing, Osei said carefully, watching her, is that we ran the language against every published paper, every case document, every court transcript, every email on record that you've authored or co-authored. The match isn't partial. Mara, the computational analysis returned 99.7% authorship probability. In our system, anything above 85% is considered a match. We've never recorded above 94%. Mara had designed that system. She had written the original parameters. She had calibrated what 85% meant. The room had gotten quieter, or she had. The ringing in her ears was higher now, and underneath it was something else. Something just below the threshold of sound, a presence that wasn't a sound at all but that her body was registering as one. The way animals register a frequency the human ear can't hold. But nothing could have prepared her for what Osei placed on the table next. The note, the real one, the one she had been circling around. The one that had made the 20-year veteran of the Behavioral Analysis Unit leave the building and not return for 6 months. It was a single page, handwritten in blue ink on white paper, standard weight, the kind of paper found in every office in the country. The handwriting was hers, or hers but later. The syntax was a map of her mind. Mara read it. She read it again. She turned it over. On the back was a list, 19 items long, formatted like field notes, abbreviated, precise, clinically detached. The kind of notes a forensic linguist writes when she is documenting evidence, when she is building a case, when she is trying to understand something that has structured itself around her. 18 of the items corresponded to things that had already happened, things from the case files, things she had read that day and things she had not yet been shown. The 19th item had not happened yet. It was dated, 3 weeks from now. A specific location, a street address in Bethesda, Maryland. Her office building, 3rd floor. And next to it, in the compressed handwriting she had not yet grown into but recognized as the handwriting she was moving toward becoming, were 4 words. 4 words that were not a threat, were not a warning, were not written for her, were written by her. She looked up at Osei. The fluorescent light held perfectly still. The room held its breath. "I've been here before," Mara said. Osei didn't move. That was the thing Mara would remember most clearly afterward. Not the note, not the list, not the 19 items written in handwriting that was almost hers but hadn't finished becoming hers yet. She would remember Osei's stillness. The way a person becomes very still when they are afraid of disturbing something they don't understand and cannot afford to break. "What do you mean?" Osei asked. Mara set the note down. Her hands were not shaking. That frightened her more than shaking would have. She was calm in the way that deep water is calm. Not because nothing is moving, but because what is moving is too far below the surface to disturb the top. "I mean," she said slowly, "that I have been in this room before. Not a room like this. This room. That light." She gestured upward without looking. "It flickers twice and then holds. I knew it was going to do that. I knew it before it happened, and I have been telling myself for the last 4 hours that I knew it because I had noticed a pattern. Because that's what I do. I notice patterns, and that is a clean and acceptable explanation. She paused. It's not the right explanation. Osei waited. The fourth note, Mara said. The one from the twins in Elegy. There was a word in the second paragraph. An unusual construction. You were going to ask me about it, and then you didn't. Osei's expression shifted by a fraction. I decided it wasn't relevant yet. You decided that because your phone buzzed and you looked at it and you lost the thread. Your phone buzzed at 2:47 in the afternoon. I didn't look at a clock. I didn't need to. Mara pressed her fingertips together, a gesture her students would have recognized. The gesture she made when she was assembling something in the air in front of her before she put it into words. I have experienced this room before. Not in memory. Not in a dream. In something that doesn't have a proper word in any language I've been trained to use professionally. I've sat at this table. I've read these notes. I've had this conversation. She stopped. And the conversation doesn't end well. The room's cold pressed in. The kind of cold that preserves, that keeps things exactly as they were. Tell me about the 19th item, Osei said. Mara had been waiting for that. She had been waiting for it the way you wait for a door to open that you can already hear footsteps approaching. I don't need to. You've read it. I want to hear it from you. Why? Because you said you've been in this room before. And I want to know if what you say matches what's written. I want to know if the document is predictive, or if you are. And there it was. The question underneath all the other questions. The one that the entire case had been quietly building toward since that Wednesday in August when Mara had driven down to Quantico and sat across a bolted-down table from a woman who had been waiting for her specifically. Not because Mara was the best forensic linguist in the country. Because Mara was the subject. Because the case had always been about her, not the victims, not the kidnapper. The case was an argument, written across 17 crimes and 15 ransom notes and a postmarked envelope from the day she was born, and the argument it was making was this. There is no distance between the observer and the observed. There is no clean wall between the person who reads the evidence and the evidence itself. There never was. She understood it all at once, the way understanding sometimes comes. Not gradually, not with the satisfaction of assembled pieces clicking into place, but as a sudden flood, a pressure equalizing, a truth that had always been present becoming visible. The notes were not written by her and sent back through time. They were not written by a copycat or a stalker or a colleague who had studied her for years. The computational analysis wasn't evidence of forgery. It was evidence of something the science she had built her life on had no framework to contain. The notes existed because she would write them. Not had written them. Would write them. In the compressed, stress-altered handwriting of her future self. In the abbreviations she had not yet refined into the final form they appeared on those pages. She would one day sit somewhere. She didn't know where, she didn't know when, and she would write these notes because she would have to. Because someone had to. Because the children had to be found and the language had to exist and the thread had to run backward through time in order for her to be sitting in this room now, recognizing herself, setting the events in motion that would one day lead her to write the very documents she was currently reading. The loop had no beginning. She had been trying to find the seam. There was no seam. There was no originating author because the causality was circular, folded back on itself, the same syntactic fold she had noticed in the first note on the first page, the fold she used herself without knowing why she used it, the fold that was the smallest and most intimate signature of her mind, and it was there in documents that preceded her that had always been there, waiting. The 19th item. She looked back at the page, though she hadn't needed to look at it again. She had read it once. Forensic linguists have excellent retention. The 4 words sat in the center of her mind like something carved. She had written, asterisk I understand now. Done. Asterisk. Not a threat. Not a warning. A notation. A field note, the way she wrote them when a case was closed and the finding had been documented and the work was finished. A professional full stop, written from some future moment in which she had finished understanding what she was only beginning to understand now. Done. She told Osei this. All of it. She spoke for 40 minutes without stopping, laying it out in the precise and ordered way of a woman who had spent 19 years learning to say exactly what the evidence supported and nothing more. Osei recorded it. She did not interrupt. When Mara finished, the room was very quiet. What happens 3 weeks from now? Osei asked. The address. Your office. 3rd floor. I go back to my office, Mara said simply. I go back to my office and I continue working. And at some point, not 3 weeks from now, not 3 years from now, but at some point, I will understand this completely. And when I understand it completely, I will do what I always do with a completed analysis. She glanced at the page. I'll note it, and that note will already exist. Agent Osei closed the folder. The sound of it was very soft in that cold, preserving room. 17 kidnappings. All 17 victims recovered. None of them with any memory of the time they had been gone. No perpetrator ever identified, charged, or even credibly profiled. 15 ransom notes, all written in Mara Voss's linguistic fingerprint. All confirmed by a computational system she had designed herself at a 99.7% authorship match. 1 envelope postmarked on the day she was born. 1 note with a list on the back. 19 items. 18 past. 1 present. The case was officially suspended in early 2020, citing insufficient evidence for prosecution. It is, as far as is publicly known, still open. Mara returned to her office in Bethesda, 3rd floor, coffee and old carpet smell, papers across every surface, a cat named Subject waiting on her chair. She continued to work. She was quoted once, in an academic paper she published in 2021 on the limitations of authorship attribution in forensic linguistics, in a footnote most readers skimmed past. The footnote read, "Asterisk language does not require a singular point of origin. A text can be authored by the act of being read. The reader who recognizes a fingerprint may, in some configurations, be the source of it." Asterisk. No one asked her what she meant. Her colleagues assumed it was theoretical. The 20-year veteran of the Behavioral Analysis Unit who left the building the day they found the 19th item did not return for 6 months, as I told you at the beginning. When he came back, he requested reassignment. He does not discuss the Voss case. He has never discussed it publicly. He has also, according to 3 separate colleagues, stopped reading. Any reading, books, reports, case files. He dictates his notes now and has someone read documents to him aloud. When asked about this change, he says he needed a new system. He does not elaborate. And Mara Voss, Dr. Mara Voss, forensic linguist, 43 years old, dark circles under pale eyes, hair pulled back tight, almost always working. She is still out there, still writing, still annotating, still building her particular system of abbreviated field notes and handwriting that has, by all accounts, grown slightly more compressed over the years, slightly more pressured, the kind of change that accumulates in a person's hand when something bears down on them long and hard enough to change the way they move through the world. She has never told anyone what the 4 words felt like to read. But I think you already know. I think you felt it too just now, that specific chill of recognizing your own reflection in something that was made before you arrived to cast it. That sensation of being both the source and the discovery. Of understanding that some doors open from both sides simultaneously, and that what you think you're walking toward you have, in some sense, already come from. There are things that cannot be solved. There are only things that can be understood, imperfectly and noted and set down, and carried forward into whatever comes next. Done. Every week, Mindshift Stories brings you the cases that keep investigators awake at night, the ones too disturbing for mainstream media. If that sounds like something you need, subscribe now and never miss a story.